Welcome to the British Accent Podcast. I'm really glad you're here with us today. In this episode, we're talking about a topic that is affecting almost everyone in the world right now. No matter where you live, what job you have, or how you manage your money, you have probably felt it already. Today's topic is the cost of living is still rising in Europe and worldwide. This means that everyday life is becoming more expensive, step by step, month after month. Things like food, rent, transport, and energy are costing more than they used to. And for many people, incomes are not increasing at the same speed. In simple words, people are spending more money just to live the same kind of life they had before. That is why this topic is not just about economics or statistics. It is about real life, real stress, and real decisions that families and individuals have to make every single day. In today's episode, we will explore what is happening around the world with rising prices. We will look at how daily expenses have changed, especially in Europe. We will also talk about why this is happening, and what factors are pushing prices higher. And finally, we will think about what this means for the future, and whether there is any sign that things could become more stable again. One of the main reasons this topic is so important is because inflation is not just a short-term problem anymore. It has become something people feel in supermarkets, in rent contracts, and even in small daily purchases. A simple shopping basket now costs noticeably more than it did a few years ago. Even basic services like electricity, heating, and public transport have become more expensive in many countries. There are many reasons behind this global increase in living costs. Some of them are connected to energy prices, some to supply chains, and some to global economic changes. When production becomes more expensive or transportation costs rise, those changes usually reach the customer at the end. That is why you see price increases almost everywhere at the same time. So in this episode, we are going to break everything down in a simple and clear way. No complicated terms, no heavy theory, just real explanations that help you understand what is going on. And by the end, you should have a much clearer idea of why life feels more expensive today, and what is really behind this global trend. So let's get started. To understand the cost of living today, we first need to look at what is happening around the world. Right now, one of the most important global trends is the general rise in prices. This means that in many countries, almost everything is becoming more expensive over time. It is not limited to one region or one type of product. Instead, it is happening across different continents at the same time. When we say prices are rising globally, we mean that food, housing, transport, and services are all increasing in cost. Even simple daily items, like bread, milk, coffee, or vegetables, may cost more than they did a few months or years ago. In some places, the change is slow, and in others, it is more noticeable. But the overall direction is the same everywhere: prices are going up. This process is closely related to something called inflation. Inflation is a simple economic idea, but it affects everyone in real life. It means that the value of money decreases over time, so you need more money to buy the same things. For example, if a product costs €10 today, it might cost €10.50 or €11 in the future. It does not mean the product has changed. It means the money you are using has less buying power than before. Inflation happens naturally in every economy, but sometimes it becomes stronger and faster than usual. When inflation is low, people may not notice it much in their daily lives. But when inflation is high, it becomes very clear, especially in essential goods like food and energy. One important question is why almost every country is affected at the same time. The answer is that the global economy is deeply connected. Countries trade with each other, buy resources from each other, and depend on shared systems like transportation and energy markets. For example, if fuel prices increase globally, it affects shipping costs everywhere. When shipping becomes more expensive, imported goods also become more expensive. This creates a chain reaction that reaches supermarkets, stores, and households. Another reason is that many countries experience similar global events in recent years. These events disrupted production, slowed down supply chains, and increased costs for businesses. When companies face higher costs, they often pass those costs to consumers. So even if a country is stable internally, it can still feel the impact of global price changes. That is why inflation is not just a local issue anymore. It has become a worldwide phenomenon that connects economies together in a very direct way. When we talk about the cost of living, the most important thing to understand is how it affects everyday life. It is not just about numbers in reports or economic news. It is about the real things people buy and use every single day. And in recent years, almost all of these basic expenses have become more expensive. One of the clearest examples is food and grocery prices. When people go to supermarkets today, they often notice that their usual shopping basket costs more than before. Even if they buy the same products, the total price at the checkout is higher. Basic items like bread, rice, pasta, milk, eggs, and vegetables have all increased in price in many countries. This change can feel small on a daily basis, but it becomes very noticeable over time. For example, if someone spends a certain amount every week on groceries, that weekly cost slowly increases month after month. And because food is a necessity, people cannot simply avoid these expenses. They have to adjust their budget, reduce certain items, or choose cheaper alternatives. Another major area affected is housing and rent. In many cities around the world, rent prices have increased significantly. This is especially visible in large cities where demand for housing is high. More people are competing for limited apartments, and this pushes prices upward. For many individuals and families, rent is one of the largest monthly expenses. So even a small increase can have a big impact on their financial situation. Some people are forced to move to smaller apartments or move further away from city centers to find more affordable housing. Others may share accommodation to reduce costs. At the same time, energy costs also play an important role in housing expenses. Electricity, heating, and gas bills have increased in many regions. This means that living in the same apartment now costs more than it did before, even without changing anything in daily life. Transport and fuel are another important part of rising expenses. People who use cars regularly have noticed changes in fuel prices. When fuel becomes more expensive, daily commuting also becomes more costly. This affects workers, students, and families who depend on transportation. Public transport prices have also increased in some areas. Train tickets, bus fares, and travel passes may cost more than they used to. For people who travel long distances for work or study, this becomes another financial pressure. What makes all of this more challenging is that these increases happen at the same time. Food, housing, and transport are not separate issues. They are all connected to the overall cost of living. So when prices rise in all these areas together, the pressure on individuals becomes much stronger. People often try to adjust by changing their habits. They may cook more at home instead of eating out. They may reduce unnecessary travel or look for cheaper housing options. Some people even change their lifestyle completely to manage rising costs. In simple terms, everyday life is becoming more expensive in multiple directions at once. And this is why the cost of living is such a serious issue for so many people today. When we focus on Europe, the cost of living story becomes even more interesting and, in many cases, more intense. Europe is one of the most developed regions in the world, but it has still been heavily affected by rising prices. In fact, in some areas, the impact has been more visible than in other parts of the world. One of the biggest reasons is energy prices. Energy is essential for almost everything in daily life. It is used to heat homes, power industries, run transportation systems, and support businesses. When energy prices rise, the effect spreads very quickly through the entire economy. In recent years, many European countries have experienced significant increases in electricity and heating costs. This has affected both households and businesses. For families, it means higher monthly bills just to keep their homes warm and powered. For companies, it means higher production costs, which often leads to higher prices for customers. Energy prices in Europe are influenced by many global and regional factors. Europe depends on energy imports, which means it is sensitive to changes in global supply and market conditions. When supply becomes unstable or more expensive, the effects are immediately felt by consumers. Another important point is that not all European countries are affected in exactly the same way. There are clear differences between countries such as Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. In Germany, energy costs have been a major topic of discussion. Households have seen noticeable increases in electricity and heating expenses. Germany also has a strong industrial sector, so higher energy costs affect both consumers and large companies. In France, government policies and energy structure have helped to keep some prices more controlled in certain periods. However, French households still feel pressure from general inflation, especially in food and services. In the United Kingdom, inflation has also been a serious concern. Many people have noticed higher costs in groceries, housing, and transport. Energy bills have also played a significant role, especially during colder months. Even though each country has its own economic system and policies, the overall trend is similar. The cost of living has increased across Europe, just at different speeds and intensities. Another reason Europe is strongly affected is its high standard of living and dependency on services. Many European economies rely heavily on energy-intensive industries and modern infrastructure. This means that when energy becomes more expensive, the entire system feels the pressure quickly. Also, Europe is closely connected through trade and travel between countries. So when one part of the region experiences inflation, it often influences neighboring countries as well. In simple terms, Europe is strongly affected because it is both highly developed and highly interconnected. This makes it efficient in normal times, but also more sensitive when global prices rise. So while the situation is not the same in every country, the general direction is clear. Life in Europe has become more expensive, and energy prices are one of the key reasons behind this change. When we talk about rising living costs, the most important question is not just what is happening in the economy, but how it is affecting real people. Because behind every price increase, there is a household trying to adjust, a family trying to manage, or a student trying to survive on a limited budget. One of the most affected groups is the middle class. In many countries, the middle class used to represent financial stability and comfort. People in this group could usually afford housing, transportation, education, and some level of savings or leisure. But today, many middle-class families are feeling pressure from all sides. Their incomes often do not increase as fast as prices. So even if they are still earning a stable salary, their purchasing power is slowly decreasing. This means they can buy less with the same amount of money compared to before. Many middle-class families are now forced to rethink their financial priorities. Some are reducing unnecessary spending, like entertainment, travel, or eating out. Others are focusing only on essential expenses and delaying big financial decisions. In some cases, saving money has become much more difficult than it used to be. Another group that is strongly affected is students. Students often have limited income or depend on family support. So when the cost of rent, food, and transport increases, the pressure becomes very noticeable. For students living away from home, rent is usually the biggest challenge. Even shared accommodation can be expensive in many cities. On top of that, food and daily expenses add more pressure. Some students try to work part-time jobs, but even that may not fully cover rising costs. Low-income families are also among the most vulnerable groups. For them, even small price increases can create real financial stress. When a large part of income goes to basic needs like food and housing, there is very little flexibility left. This means that any increase in rent, electricity bills, or groceries can directly affect their quality of life. Some families may need to make difficult choices, such as reducing heating usage in winter or cutting back on certain essential items. These are not easy decisions, but they reflect the real pressure of rising costs. Because of all these challenges, many people are changing their lifestyle and spending habits. Daily life is becoming more careful and more planned. People think more before buying something. They compare prices more often. They look for discounts, cheaper brands, or alternative options. Eating habits have also changed for many households. Cooking at home has become more common because eating out is more expensive. People try to reduce food waste and plan meals more carefully to save money. Transportation habits are also changing. Some people use public transport more often instead of driving to reduce fuel costs. Others combine trips or avoid unnecessary travel to save money. Even social activities have changed. People may go out less frequently or choose low-cost activities instead of expensive entertainment. This does not mean that life has stopped, but it has become more budget-conscious. In general, rising living costs are not just changing numbers in the economy. They are changing how people live, how they plan, and how they make decisions every day. And this impact is felt differently depending on income level, age, and personal situation. So while inflation is an economic concept, its effects are deeply personal. It shapes daily routines, long-term plans, and even the way people think about money and security. After looking at how rising living costs are affecting the world today, the next important question is about the future. Many people are asking the same thing. Will inflation slow down, or will prices continue to rise? And what can governments or economies actually do to change this situation? To begin with, it is important to understand that inflation does not usually disappear suddenly. It often changes slowly over time. In many cases, inflation can rise quickly during difficult periods, and then gradually slow down when conditions become more stable. But even when inflation slows, prices usually do not go back to what they were before. Instead, they tend to stay at the higher level, but increase more slowly. So the real question is not only whether prices will go down. It is more about whether the speed of price increases will become more controlled in the future. One of the main factors that can influence this situation is government action. Governments and central banks have several tools they can use to manage inflation. For example, they can adjust interest rates, which affects borrowing and spending. When interest rates are higher, people and businesses tend to spend less, which can reduce pressure on prices. Governments can also provide financial support in certain cases. This support may include subsidies for energy, assistance for low-income families, or programs that help people deal with rising costs. In some countries, temporary measures are introduced during periods of high inflation to reduce the impact on daily life. However, these actions are not always simple or immediate. Economic systems are complex, and changing one part of the system can affect other parts as well. That is why governments often need to balance between controlling inflation and maintaining economic growth. Another important factor is global stability. As we have seen, inflation is not only a local issue. It is influenced by global supply chains, energy markets, and international trade. If global conditions become more stable, it can help reduce pressure on prices in many countries at the same time. Now, when we think about possible future scenarios, there are a few main directions things could take. In a more positive scenario, inflation gradually slows down over time. Energy markets stabilize, supply chains improve, and production costs become more balanced. In this case, prices would still be higher than before, but the rapid increases would slow down, making life more predictable again. In a more neutral scenario, inflation remains at a moderate level. Prices continue to rise, but slowly and steadily. People and governments adapt to this new normal, and economic systems adjust over time. Life does not return to the past, but it becomes more stable than during high inflation periods. In a more challenging scenario, global disruptions continue, and inflation remains high for a longer time. This would mean continued pressure on households, businesses, and governments. In such a situation, people would need to keep adjusting their lifestyles and spending habits for an extended period. Of course, no one can predict the future with complete certainty. Economic conditions depend on many interconnected factors, and they can change quickly. But what is clear is that inflation is now one of the most important global issues affecting everyday life. Because of that, governments, businesses, and individuals will continue to pay close attention to it. Every decision, from energy policy to household budgeting, is influenced in some way by the cost of living. So while we cannot say exactly what will happen next, we can say that understanding this topic is becoming more and more important for everyone.
Cinema Talks.
In today's Cinema Talk section, we are looking at a film that fits perfectly with our main topic of rising living costs and financial pressure. The movie is Parasite, released in 2019. It is a South Korean film directed by Bong Joon-ho, and it became one of the most famous films in the world in recent years. It even won the Academy Award for Best Picture, which shows how powerful its message is on a global level. At first glance, Parasite tells the story of two families. One family is very poor and struggles to make a living. The other family is wealthy and lives in a modern, comfortable house. But as the story develops, it becomes much more than just a simple contrast between rich and poor. It becomes a deep exploration of social inequality, financial pressure, and survival in an unfair system. This is exactly why the movie fits our topic so well. When we talk about the rising cost of living, we are also talking about pressure between different social groups. We are talking about how money affects opportunities, comfort, and even basic dignity in life. Parasite shows these ideas in a very emotional and realistic way. One of the strongest themes in the movie is social inequality. The gap between the rich and the poor is not just financial in the film. It is also emotional, physical, and even symbolic. The wealthy family lives in a large, quiet house with space, light, and stability. Meanwhile, the poor family lives in a small, crowded basement apartment, struggling with noise, stress, and insecurity. This difference reflects something very important about real life. In many countries today, rising living costs make it harder for people to move up economically. When rent is high, when food is expensive, and when salaries do not increase at the same speed, people can feel trapped in their situation. This is similar to what we see in the movie, where the poor family is constantly trying to improve their life but faces many invisible barriers. Another important idea in Parasite is money pressure. The characters are always thinking about survival. They are not focused on luxury or comfort. They are focused on basic needs like food, shelter, and stability. This reflects the reality of many people today who are affected by inflation and rising expenses. When the cost of living increases, people often feel a constant mental pressure. They start calculating every expense. They think more about bills, rent, and daily spending. This kind of financial stress is not always visible from the outside, but it deeply affects daily life. The movie also shows how class struggle is not always direct or obvious. It is not just about conflict between rich and poor people. It is also about opportunity, access, and hidden systems that make it difficult for some people to improve their situation. Even small things, like education, housing location, or job access, can create long-term differences. In connection with our topic, rising living costs can make these gaps even wider. When prices go up, people with lower income are affected more strongly. They spend a larger percentage of their money on basic needs, leaving less room for savings or improvement. At the same time, wealthier groups are often less affected by these changes. This is why Parasite feels so relevant even outside its original cultural context. It is not just a story about one country or one family. It is a reflection of a global reality where economic pressure shapes people's lives in different ways. In simple terms, the movie helps us understand that money is not just about numbers. It is about opportunity, stability, and social structure. And when the cost of living rises, these issues become even more visible in everyday life. So, Parasite is not only a powerful film. It is also a mirror that reflects the kind of economic and social pressures we are discussing in today's episode.
Words of wisdom.
In this section, we are looking at a very powerful quote by Henry David Thoreau. He once said, "The price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it." At first, this sentence might sound simple, but it carries a very deep meaning. It is not only about money. It is about time, effort, energy, and even personal sacrifice. When Thoreau talks about the price of anything, he is not only referring to the money we pay in a store. He is also referring to everything we give up in order to earn that money. Because in real life, money is not created instantly. It is earned through work, and work takes time and effort. So, in a deeper sense, money represents a part of our life. Every hour we work is a part of our time that we exchange for income. Every job we do requires energy, focus, and personal commitment. That is why the quote says that we exchanged life for things we buy. Now, when we connect this idea to today's topic of rising living costs, the meaning becomes even more important. When prices go up, it means we need to spend more hours working to afford the same things. For example, if rent increases, a person may need to work longer hours or take extra work just to cover basic housing. If food and transport become more expensive, then even daily life requires more financial effort than before. This creates an important question for many people. Are we living to earn money, or are we earning money to live? When the cost of living rises, this balance can feel more difficult to maintain. People may feel that they are working harder, but not necessarily improving their quality of life. This quote also helps us reflect on the real value of things. Sometimes we think only about the price tag, but not about the time behind it. For example, a simple product in a store might represent hours of work from different people in different countries. From production to transportation to selling, many stages of human effort are involved. So when we buy something, we are not only spending money. We are also spending part of the time and effort that we use to earn that money. This reflection becomes especially important in a time of inflation. When prices rise, the cost of life becomes higher in a very real sense. People must carefully decide how to spend their time, energy, and income. They start to think more about what is necessary and what is optional. In the end, this quote reminds us that money is not just a number. It is connected to human life, effort, and time. And in a world where the cost of living is increasing, understanding this connection becomes even more important. It encourages us to think more deeply about our choices, our work, and the value of what we buy every day.
Curious Minds. The Science Corner.
In this Science Corner, we are going to understand a very important question in a simple way. Why does inflation happen? Why do prices keep rising over time, even when we are not doing anything differently in our daily lives? To understand this, we need to break it down into a few basic ideas from economics. We will avoid complicated terms and focus only on simple explanations that anyone can understand. One of the main reasons inflation happens is something called the balance between demand and supply. Demand means how much people want or need something. Supply means how much of that thing is available in the market. When demand is higher than supply, prices usually go up. This happens because more people are trying to buy the same limited amount of goods. For example, if many people want a certain product, but there are not enough products available, sellers can increase the price. People still need the product, so they often have to pay more. Over time, if this happens across many products and services, the general price level in the economy starts to rise. That is one of the basic causes of inflation. Another very important factor is energy costs and production chains. Almost everything we use in daily life depends on energy in some way. Factories need electricity. Transport needs fuel. Heating systems need gas or electricity. When energy becomes more expensive, it affects every step of production. For example, if it costs more to run a factory, then the cost of making products increases. If transport becomes more expensive, then shipping goods from one place to another also becomes more expensive. These extra costs do not disappear. They are usually added to the final price that customers pay. This is why energy prices have such a strong effect on inflation around the world. We also need to consider the role of global events in price increases. The world economy is very connected today. Countries depend on each other for trade, raw materials, and production. So when something happens in one part of the world, it can affect prices everywhere. For example, if supply chains are disrupted, it becomes harder and slower to move goods between countries. When goods become harder to transport or produce, their prices usually increase. Global events can also affect confidence in markets, which can lead to changes in investment, production, and spending behavior. All of this can contribute to inflation in different ways. So inflation is not always caused by one simple reason. It is often the result of many global factors happening at the same time. Finally, we need a simple explanation of how money loses value. This is one of the most important ideas in understanding inflation. When prices rise, it means that each unit of money can buy fewer things than before. In other words, the value of money decreases. For example, if you could buy a certain amount of groceries with €10 last year, but now you need 11 or 12 euros for the same items, then your money has lost some of its purchasing power. The money itself has not changed. But what it can buy has changed. This is what we mean when we say money loses value over time. To summarize this science corner, inflation happens because of several connected reasons. It can come from imbalances between demand and supply. It can come from higher energy and production costs. It can be influenced by global events and supply chain problems. And it results in money slowly losing its purchasing power. When we put all of this together, we can understand that inflation is not a random event. It is a natural result of how modern economies work and how deeply connected the world has become. We have now reached the end of today's episode of the British Accent Podcast. Let's take a moment to quickly summarize the main ideas we discussed today. In this episode, we talked about the rising cost of living in Europe and around the world. We started by understanding what is happening globally and how prices are increasing in many different countries at the same time. We explained inflation in a simple way and how it reduces the purchasing power of money over time. Then we looked at everyday life and how rising prices affect food, rent, transport, and energy. We saw that these are not abstract economic ideas, but real changes that people experience in supermarkets, homes, and daily routines. After that, we focused on Europe specifically. We discussed energy prices, differences between countries, and why Europe is strongly affected by global economic changes. We also explored the impact on people's lives. We talked about middle-class pressure, students, and low-income families. And we saw how many people are changing their lifestyle and spending habits to adapt to higher costs. Finally, we looked at the future. We discussed whether inflation might slow down, how governments respond, and what possible economic scenarios could happen next. We also reflected on a powerful quote in our Words of Wisdom section, and we connected it to the idea that money is really linked to time, effort, and life itself. And in Cinema Talks, we explored the movies Parasite, which shows social inequality and financial pressure in a very powerful way. So overall, today's episode was not just about economics. It was about real life, real people, and the challenges many individuals and families are facing right now. If there is one final message to take from today's discussion, it is this. Understanding the cost of living is important because it affects every part of our lives. From the food we buy, to the homes we live in, to the way we plan our future. Even small changes in prices can have a big impact over time. But at the same time, awareness is powerful. When we understand what is happening, we can make better decisions, plan more carefully, and adapt more effectively to changes around us. Thank you for listening to this episode of the British Accent Podcast. I really appreciate your time and attention. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to stay connected for more discussions like this in the future. And as always, I would love to hear your thoughts. You can share your ideas, your questions, or your own experiences with rising living costs. Before we go, here is a small teaser for the next episode. In the next episode, we will explore another important and very interesting topic that connects technology, daily life, and modern society. It is something that is changing the way we work, learn, and even think. So make sure to join us next time. Until then, take care, and see you in the next episode.